I am Thomas Bowles, Ag Agent from Prince William County, and I am for the soil, for the future, and for the planet.
Hey everybody, Jeff Ishii here, your host for another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Eric and Mary will be joining us in just a few moments with a very special guest, and we are really excited to welcome this guest to the episode this week. And he is the author of a book on Amazon.com that is receiving rave reviews. His name is Jon. I'll let Eric do the full introduction in just a moment or two, but he is the author of a book that is receiving a lot of 5-star ratings on Amazon.com. The title of that book is A Soil Owner's Manual: How to Restore and Maintain Soil Health. An owner's manual. You know, you've got one for your refrigerator, you've got one for your tractor, you've got one for a lot of stuff around your house, but do you have one for your soil? Well, you can. That book is available on Amazon.com, and wanted to just share with you one review from Amazon. It was a 5-star review from someone named Durwood, who says, lots of easy to understand, usable, regenerative soil information. It is the best book I have read so far. Highly recommended. And that is just one review of many reviews on Amazon.com. Once again, the name of the book is A Soil Owner's Manual: How to Restore and Maintain Soil Health. Well, let's go ahead and get right to this week's episode. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining us today, we have Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability, and also Mary Sketch Bryant in Richmond. She is joining us with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And Eric, if you would do the honors of introducing our guest today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We're pleased to have Jon Stika with us. Jon is currently located in western North Dakota, but he's an agronomist, conservationist, soil scientist, and a former soil health instructor with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I became more aware of Jon's work in recently reading his book, A Soil Owner's Manual: How to Restore and Maintain Soil Health. And if I could just take a moment, Jeff, just to read a preface that sort of struck me. It says, this book was written out of both compassion and frustration. Compassion for the farmers, ranchers, gardeners, and others who make a living from the soil, who continue to struggle with all the symptoms of dysfunctional soil. Frustration with the status quo of agriculture focused on yield, with little or no understanding of how the soil is designed to function. There is no system of production or soil amendment that will fix what is wrong with your soil. Only your understanding of how the soil functions will fix what ails your soil. You must become a student of what makes soil healthy. It's that simple, and there are no shortcuts. That really struck me, and I just wanted to invite Jon to talk about his journey. And he's also considered one of the founders of the soil health movement, so we're glad to have Jon as a guest.
Thank you, Eric. My journey, I guess, would have started in 1992 when, after I was introduced to a soil quality test kit and played around with that a little bit with a few farmers and began to understand a little bit more about how the soil functions. Instead of just as a soil scientist, I knew how to classify the soil, I knew how to describe the properties, but I really didn't know how it functioned. And that struck me at the time that I called myself a soil scientist, but I don't understand how the soil functions. And so I set about to educate myself on how it does function. And by 1992, I was confident enough or foolish enough to actually go and give a presentation on soil health to a group of farmers at a meeting, a winter workshop, maybe 40 or so farmers that a soil conservation district had organized. And so I had my PowerPoint slide set and I got started. And one of the first things I said was that tillage was very destructive and degraded the soil. And, hands shot up and everybody, what are you talking about? We've been doing this forever, and you're saying that we're destroying the soil and all these things. And needless to say, I didn't use the rest of my PowerPoint slides. It just turned into this discussion about understanding how the soil functioned. And when it was over, I wasn't so sure how well that was all received. I thought, well, they're going to think this guy's crazy. And so anyway, afterwards, and everyone was kind of visiting a little bit, it was the wives of the farmers that came up to me and said, you're right. This is not good for the soil. And we need to understand this, and we need to start to fix this. We need to start to restore this. So that encouraged me to keep going. And from there, at that time, NRCS was talking about, Natural Resources Conservation Service was talking about training our own people about soil health. So they were looking for people to be on this teaching cadre to teach this soil health course. So I did that for about 20 some years while I worked for NRCS. So I was all over the country teaching NRCS employees, but then that became, a lot of the instructors became sought after as speakers to groups of farmers. So we did a lot of workshops and conferences around the country, speaking to farmers that were interested. So it was a very interesting journey, and it was kind of like flying an airplane while you're building it. We were learning as much from the farmers as they were learning from us. And I got involved with an international group between North Dakota and Manitoba, and they held a lot of conferences and did a lot of things that helped producers understand these things. So I was both speaking at these conferences and learning from the other presenters, half of which were farmers, at the same time. So like you mentioned in the preface to the book, we have to be students. We always have to be students. And I'm learning new things about the soil all the time. I probably never will stop learning.
We're talking today with Jon Stika. He is the author of a book written in 2016 entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And Jon, I had the opportunity to go to Amazon.com and actually read a couple of chapters or some excerpts from your book. And I was really intrigued by chapter 2, which is entitled, What's Wrong with My Soil Anyway? So what are some of the symptoms that a farmer would see to indicate there's something wrong, something's not going right here?
Probably the biggest one is water runoff, erosion. And I spend a lot of time when I'm working with people sorting out goals and symptoms and problems and so on and so forth. And soil erosion is not a problem, and water runoff is not a problem. Those are symptoms of the problem of dysfunctional soil. So to get that understood, that don't try to address erosion, which NRCS, SCS did for many years. Don't try and address this symptom. We need to address the problem. The problem is the water's not going into the soil. And the water's not going into the soil because it's not stable, because all of the biology's been degraded that makes the soil aggregate stable. So, we really need to be careful when we talk about goals and symptoms and tools and problems and all of these things, that you need to sort those out so you're actually addressing the problem, not just some symptoms.
And Jon, you you have, I know, a background in chemistry, but you really emphasize the soil as a biological system. And, it would just be interesting how you work with growers and other members of the public on educating on that soil as a biological system.
Yes, and I usually start out with having them look at soil aggregates and understanding that it's the biological glue that holds those aggregates together. And by managing their soil, the principles that I mentioned in the book, by managing their soil as a biological system, we build and maintain those glues that stabilize the soil aggregates. So when it rains, the water can flow down into the soil in between those aggregates. If they're not stable, if they fall apart right at the soil surface where they get wet first, they fall apart there, they plug everything up. Now the water can't move down. Now you have runoff, now you have erosion, now you have nutrients leaving the field, all those things. So I usually start out with some kind of a demonstration to show them what aggregates are and what really keeps them stable.
And John, I know you also have worked both with farmers and others looking at what are the hurdles for soil health management. And I also came across one of your articles about working with lenders and landowners and renters. What should they know?
Well, the biggest obstacle is our own thinking. It's that paradigm shift of first admitting that the soil is degraded and we need to do something different to restore it. And getting producers, getting lenders, getting all of these people to understand that usually involves some kind of a demonstration or a little session in the field to look at some of these things. Quite a few years ago now, we were up against a hurdle trying to get producers to switch to no tillage, which, by the way, almost all of Western North Dakota is no-till today. But the hurdle was the lenders lending them the money to buy the equipment. So one of the local lenders that was already on board organized a little meeting. We went out in the field and I showed all of these bankers about aggregate stability, about soil biology, about how what we've been doing is not working. It's just making it worse. And after a little bit, they realized, hey, this, by managing the soil correctly and getting it to function again, that takes away risk, which is their whole world. That's what they look at is risk when they're going to lend money.
Very well said. And once again, we're talking with Jon Stika. He is the author of a book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And John, final question from me. We've still got 3 or 4 minutes left, and feel free to tell a story if you like to. But you of course realize that all farms are different. A farm in North Dakota, a farm in West Texas, a farm in Michigan, a farm in Virginia. Every farm is different. And there are farms that might have 2,000 acres of small grains, or the other farms here in Virginia. One of the fastest growing sectors of agriculture and horticulture is the wine grape industry. And let's look at that as an example. A grape vineyard, how would they improve soil? They don't have tractors in the field. They can't incorporate things, to the soil. Or so how would a grape vineyard improve their soil? It's kind of a static situation, is it not?
Not necessarily, but it can be, but not necessarily. And anytime I answer a question like that, farms are all very different. Their soils, their resources, their workforce, but the principles are the same. The less disturbance, more diversity, living roots, and keeping the soil covered are the principles that make soil biology happy. So in a vineyard situation, I would look at what are we lacking in that situation? Are we tilling in between the rows and keeping the soil bare to control weeds? Or do we have permanent cover, a diverse group of perennial plants that are keeping that soil fed and keeping that soil covered? Or are we tilling it and leaving it bare? Things like that we can add diversity, we can add cover, we can add living roots if those are the limiting factors. So that's true with any situation, any system. Just look at which one of these 4 principles am I lacking and that I could really improve upon.
Well, John, sometimes I guess it's starting with the question as to, is this soil covered or not? But you also, within agriculture, the markets can be very volatile and people might feel that they don't have the time, or maybe it's a long-term process. For people that are looking for early success, if you would have any sort of recommendations, even if it's a paradigm shift or an educational process, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, it would be to educate yourself and understand that your soil is most likely degraded if it's been in agricultural production for any amount of time. And then just to experiment. You don't have to change everything on your whole farm. Pick a field, pick a small area, and start trying some of these things that will apply these principles on a small scale, whatever you feel you can risk, until you learn and you can see for yourself how the soil reacts and how it changes and improves. Then you can move that, whatever it is that you changed and are doing, you can move that into more of your operation as you go. You don't ever want to change the whole operation at once. You can have an epic failure that way. You will have failures. Do it on a small scale and learn from those until you get things figured out. Then you can apply it on a lot more of your operation.
Jon Stika, author of the book entitled A Soil Owner's Manual. And John, where is that book available?
You can find it on Amazon, just like most other books.
All right. And of course, your local bookstores, they can always order it for you. And I've certainly enjoyed reading the excerpt so far, and I'll be ordering it this afternoon. So it looks like a really good book. And I think you would encourage it for anyone, not just farmers, but anyone interested in their food supply. Once again, Jon Stika, author of A Soil Owner's Manual. Well, Mary and Eric, it's been a real pleasure. And thank you all for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jeff. This has been great.
And just a quick footnote before we go, we will have Mr. Jon Stika back for a part 2 episode as we continue our conversation about soil health. This concludes this episode. For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. And if you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office or your local USDA Service Center or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of Jason Shaw and Mr. Ruiz, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.